Oh yes, guys, we're back, and as you can see, we have a very, very special guest with us today. We have Pierce from Radix, and today we're going to be speaking about Radix Babylon, all the new updates, what's next for Radix, the roadmap, and all kinds of other topics. I know you guys are following Radix a lot on our channel because you have a lot of questions all the time about Radix. And here with us we have Pierce. Pierce, what's happening? How are you doing? Welcome to the show.
I'm good. Thank you for having me. It's great to be on.
And you guys have a lot of things to do, I assume, because Radix Babylon release is very soon, and the main people are excited. So we will be discussing that. And tell us how things have been since our last interview, which was, I think, during the spring, maybe in March, April, something like that. What have you guys been doing since then, and what has happened?
Yeah, I think the main interesting thing, sort of like Radix has been sort of following this very defined path towards Babylon. And we realized that a bunch of things had to be in place. And last time we spoke, we got a lot of the tech in place, and we were really then focusing on ramping up our developer ecosystem. And since then, we've just seen this incredible growth in the number of developers who are programming with Scrypto, the programming language that we've introduced, and who are starting to build production dApps that are going to be going live on Radix. We've got about 50 dApps that we expect to go live when Babylon goes live, and the current running network gets upgraded to include smart contracts. And it's really been the focus on that. I mean, I love the saying, which is bear markets is for builders, and it totally is. You get this much reduced in noise, but in some ways you get this sort of more time for builders to be experimental. There isn't like the immediate need to like ship the next feature like tomorrow, and you can actually have a lot more time to think strategically of the kind of things you want to build. And by bringing this sort of new programming language into the ecosystem, into the crypto ecosystem, we've given these developers a bunch of new tools that allow them to sort of build in a really novel way. That means that they're able to build much more securely, but also build functionality that wasn't possible before. And so since we last spoke, the Radix wallet has been in developer preview in a sort of a pretty advanced state, which has given the developers the ability to do the front end and back end integrations and start working really on the user experience of the dApps. And we've also seen a lot of sort of advancements in how you use the tools of the Radix engine to build some really cool extra features. So like we've seen people like go, what's really interesting for me about smart people is that smart people like to iterate. They look at something, they go, hey, Uniswap v3, that's a really good idea. How can we improve that? So not only have we seen like sort of Uniswap v3 examples, or liquidity examples, or MakerDAO examples, or, you know, Aave examples, people are then taking those and they're going, right, now I've got this new toolbox. So how can I apply my intellect to it? And how can I like build new things? So that the kind of stuff that I was looking forwards to just there being a good Uniswap v3 clone. Now there are people who have taken like that and run with it, and there's so many like cool extra things that people are doing that I think is going to be really exciting for DeFi on Radix. And that's really been the main thing, is that ecosystem focus.
And so let's remind our viewers why Babylon is so important, because I know many people know that it's important, they look forward to it, they're excited, and there are already today many dApps on Radix, but they're built without Scrypto. Or how do they currently build, and what will be the difference for dApps now with Babylon, post-Babylon?
Yeah, so like our roadmap has been, because we rebuilt the whole stack. We started with consensus, and we built a new form of consensus. We built a new form of execution environment, replacing the EVM. We built a new programming language, and built a new, user experience environment. And we realized that the best way of releasing that was going to be in stages. So we started with Olympia, and then Olympia just allows you to do transactions, so you can send and receive tokens on the Radix network, and it allows you to do staking and unstaking, plus one extra thing that we added, which was in the Radix engine, tokens are native features. So you don't, when you create a token on top of Radix, you're not doing it like you do as an ERC20. You actually declare to the network, to the Radix engine, what characteristics of the token you want. So you say, hey, I want a token called Ivan. I want to have 10,000 of them. I want it to be multi-issuance, and I want it to be issued here. And just with that, just that idea of being able to issue like other tokens on top of the Radix network, which was testing the Radix engine, right? This was all about testing the security of our execution environment, of testing the security of our public network before we added in the programming language element. Lots of people have started to hack together things. Started to hack together things over the last 2 years on top of the Radix network. So we had people doing like NFT style issuances, and there's like some huge communities in the Radix networks, Radix communities like Abandoned Scorpions and Radical Penguins and Nerds Republic, and there's a bunch of like fun stuff that people have done just because they can issue tokens, and to add on to that, like. I constantly talk about, and Y Combinator talks about this a lot as well, the importance of shipping things early and trialing them with your customers, right? And so a bunch of the people who are building dexes for the Babylon network went ahead and build like what they call C dexes, centralized dexes, where they use some of the functions of the Radix network and then some things on a server to be able to test out their code and their user experience, and also start running like test environments for Scrypto before the mainnet comes along. So there was like 3 or 4 dexes on top of Radix before they even had smart contracts that was pushing, millions of dollars of volume across it, just to get used to, getting the idea out into the Radix community, building their network, building their ecosystem, building their user base. And that's been incredibly exciting. But that's before there's actually been much functionality on the network. And then all of that will transition across to Babylon when Babylon goes live.
Right. And as you normally refer in your docs, Babylon and Scrypto is like game engines. It's gonna do to crypto what game engines did to gaming. So let's talk about that, because I like how you normally explain it in your docs and within your community, and I think that's also important for our audience to know. So let's describe the impact that you guys want to have on this industry with a bit more standardized approaches to all of the different things we do, whether it's tokens, DEX, lending, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so there's 2 ways you can look at this, and I think both ways are really interesting. So I'll go through both of them. The first is, when you think about the Ethereum ecosystem today, or when you think about the Solana ecosystem or any of these ecosystems, when you want to, what you have is an adoption of standards that then ends up creating economics around it. So the ERC20 token standard is an example of a standard that has been adopted, and then as a result of the adoption of that standard, you were able to create the standardization for the sending and receiving of tokens, for the holding of tokens, and all this kind of stuff. And then ERC721 did that for NFTs. And that standard, once it emerged, people could move very quickly and start building on top of it. And now you're seeing things like soulbound tokens, which is starting to sort of push the standards for things like identity and KYC and repudiatable credentials and stuff like that, right? But the problem in all of these ecosystems, and it sort of doesn't get talked about in sort of like everyday conversation, because unless you're like deep in the sort of the ecosystem, you don't see it. But getting these standards adopted is really, really hard, because you have to go through an EIP process, and every network has its own version of this, but the Ethereum one is the most well-known one, right? And the EIP process essentially gets everyone to agree what the interfaces are and how smart contracts can interact with them, and then how wallets will integrate them, and then how exchanges will integrate them, and then how custodians will integrate them. And then there's all of these like sort of onwards parts of the supply chain that have to be adopt these standards before the standards can actually emerge and be used. Like EIP, ERC 721 actually took quite a long time to take off until we got to things like Blur, right? And you're seeing the same thing with things like soulbound tokens, and you're seeing the thing, and this social consensus process. There isn't one standard for any of these. There's always competing standards. There's always arguments about exactly how it should be implemented and all this kind of stuff. What the Radix engine brings is a form of universal standardization to the network. So you don't actually, like, the way that you declare things to the Radix engine, as long as you follow the Radix engine standard for integrating, which everyone does, and every single exchange that's implementing Babylon is integrating the Radix engine. Every single wallet that is using the Radix network is integrating the Radix engine. As soon as you've adopted the framework standard, every other standard that you create is instantly adopted. So someone comes up with a new token type, there's now no longer an argument of what do the interfaces look like? How are we going to get it integrated into custody? How are we going to get integrated into exchanges? Like that standardized framework gets rid of a huge amount of social consensus and time lag that happens behind innovation that people don't even realize. So that's the first part of it, is this concept or realization that a big part of public ledger's success starts with the standardization of how people express objects and use those objects on top of public ledgers. And that's what the Radix engine does. It brings this standardization
Let's compare it to the game engine. So before the game engines, everyone tinkered around with their own graphics library, implement your own physics, which means that each time you create a new game, you have to either take someone else's or do your own, but there was no this platform where you could extend it and build on top of. Until you had Unity and Unreal, which is basically two engines that all games are using now. If I remember a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, people were still saying, oh, this game is made with this engine, is fantastic. Now no one is doing that. Everyone is just using Unreal and that's it. There is no advantage to build your own because Unreal has everything. And this means
there's a disadvantage, right? Like because Cyberpunk built their own and it was an absolute shit show.
Yeah. But what's important to have is this standardization, but also you need to have endless customizability. So if you have your own game, you want it to look unique, you want it to look different. And game engines have created these pipelines where you can create your own shaders, your own code, your own graphics, but it's still standardized and it's still easy for different devs to dev. And in case the whole game engine updates, then all of the plugins you've made yourself to customize your game, they're still relevant and they're still you're still able to use them. So is that how you're thinking, and how will this work more practically with the Radix engine? Can you maybe give some example? Let's say that I want to build a DEX, I want to build a token. Like, what do I do to make it so that it is standard, but yet I can customize it to my own needs? How do you combine that?
Yeah, so the game engine analogy is a really good one, and the other thing that game engines did is they got rid of having to worry about building a lot of the game stack, right? You didn't have to build the rendering engine; it already had a rendering engine. You didn't have to build the physics engine; it already had a physics engine. With the Radix engine, you've got the same thing but for DeFi, and there's like a bunch of primitives that are really important for decentralized finance to work, that when you are in the Ethereum world, you have to kind of go and redefine every time you want to build a thing. So a good example of this is permissions, right? So your permission stack determines like what powers administration keys have, what powers one contract has when calling another contract, like how you prevent permissions escalation, and like these are all very deep topics, but at the headline, what this means is that security becomes really hard because you have to work out how to build a permission layer that allows your applications to do just the things you want them to do, but no more, and that no entity or app has too much power to be able to go in and say arbitrarily, oh, send me all of the money in that pool. Why? Because I have this permission, right? And we completely we created an entirely new permission stack that again is defined in the Radix engine as a standardized framework that you can use. And you can think of this as like the rendering engine, right? It's the thing that makes DeFi actually work from a user perspective, that keeps the things safe. But the permissions engine,
Piers, so when you speak about this is, to me, this sounds more like an operating system where in case you have, for example, a browser has all kinds of secret information in its memory. Let's say you open up your Gmail in your browser. Now your browser has loaded all of your Gmail messages in its RAM. And of course, if you have some other app like WhatsApp running on the same computer, you don't want WhatsApp to read the RAM in this Chrome browser, for example, where you have all of your private messaging, and vice versa. So with Radix, what you just said is kind of the same, where you build an app on top of Radix engine or this operating system, which in my mind is also a good analogy, where the operating system or Radix engine ensures that if you build a smart contract, it cannot drain the funds of another smart contract. Kind of like with these applications and the resource sharing and permission sharing in operating systems. So is that a good analogy, or what do you think?
It is a dangerous analogy. Like like conceptually for like for everyday people, yes, I think that would work. But from a tech point of view, like everything on top of a public ledger is essentially running within its own virtual machine environment, and you are and the talks between those layers are explicit rather than your like any concept of resource sharing. Like WhatsApp has to care about resource sharing on the same machine, but on a network, I'm only caring about it from the point of view of gas. Anyway, I see where you're getting
Well,
at. I see where you're getting at.
yeah. I mean, basically, the permissions, which code can move which money? Is that a
Yeah.
better way of putting it? That if I have built an app, I want to ensure that the money can only be moved by, for example, the code that I've written. That,
Yeah.
that there's no malicious like NFT drainer that can just drain everything. And
Or that
so
only
you can build.
authorized tokens can interact, or that
Exactly.
only authorized applications can interact, like, or that you can
Exactly.
specify the level of like permission that those authorized applications can interact. Yes, this is all really, really core to security. And the Radix engine, one of the standardized pieces that you have is the permissions framework, and like so many hacks and exploits happen just here. Like I think we
Yeah.
did an estimate of something between like 1 billion and 2 billion worth of hacks is just from this problem of like permissioning in DeFi environments. And we've just created a standardized framework that's incredibly powerful. But then because it's a standardized framework, you don't have to work out how do I call this application. It's like, oh, I have to have these permissions, and they're well specified in how those permissions work. And you don't create a new permission framework every time you create an application. And like all of that reduces the time to develop by huge numbers, right? Like because you don't
Yeah.
have to invent a new security paradigm every time you create a new application.
Well, just to give more parallels. So let's say in smartphone, you have different apps where
Yeah.
you can ask for location of the user. You can ask to send
Right.
notifications, but it's still the
Right.
operating system that is managing this. That is
Yeah.
managing. Okay, user said yes to this app, no to that app. So this app can do this, that app cannot. So is that something that people can conceptually think about as well? That Radix is this kind of operating system or game engine, like you say, and it basically manages all of these permissions. And you as a dev, you're basically right, ask permission here. I did get permission. Okay, then do this. I did not get permission. Okay, we cannot do it. Then we need to tell the user to give permission. So is that how it will work approximately?
Yeah, I mean, it's still very customizable. You can set whatever permissions you want, but you have a framework in which to do
Yeah.
it, and all of the validation of permissions being present is all done by the Radix engine. So you have much greater assurance around security. You also have much greater efficiency because it's done by this framework, which is actually built into the ledger itself and operates in a finite state machine environment, which means that it's also a lot more performant. So you get a lot.
Yeah.
You are able to squeeze a lot more of bang for your buck out of every single operation you do on top of the network as well. That's one part of it, right? Then another part of it is a standardized concept of accounts. So everyone's familiar with the Ethereum account abstraction model, right? What a lot of people don't realize is how hokey the Ethereum account abstraction model is, because it isn't actually built. It is essentially this sort of like sidecar to how Ethereum works, where you have a separate mempool and you have a separate system that essentially you're able to delegate authorities to and then be able to have actions done. What we've done on Radix is we've created the account model as a part of the Radix engine as well. And every single account on Radix is a smart contract. There's no such thing as EOA accounts. So the concept of interacting with an individual user and the concept of interacting with another DApp is exactly the same interfaces. So a user calling a DApp like a smart contract would, or a smart contract calling another smart contract, they're all basically work on the same framework again. And you know that every single user that comes to you is only going to interact in a certain way, and you have certain permissions in how you can interact with that user. Again, you've standardized the concept of a user account, and by standardizing that to a smart contract, you can also do things like decentralized account recovery. You can also do things like permission rules around spending. You have multi-sig for free. Like the entire application of Gnosis Safe is essentially just an inherent feature of the ledger and an inherent feature of smart contracts. Smart accounts. So all of those things come for free as well. And what people don't realize is there's a lot of complexity in dealing with EOA versus abstracted accounts that sort of just goes away. Like people are trying to like get rid of EOAs on an Ethereum because it makes all of the cool logic for smart contracts twice as complicated, because you've got to deal with whether or not you're dealing with an EOA account, which is an account that's generated just using a public-private key pair, or a smart contract account. And again, because it's all built into the ledger, there is basically it's basically essentially costless to create these accounts. There is a cost to it, but the cost only comes once you do the first transaction to it. So from a user point of view, I can set up a smart contract account with no Radix tokens, and I can get an address that I can get things sent to me, and then I can start interacting with the ledger, and all of that onboarding becomes massively easier as well.
So let's say I have a dApp. Can I sponsor user gas fees easy in this with this smart account from day one with Babylon, or how will it be?
From day one with Babylon, yeah. So we call these this delegated fees, and delegated fees in Radix is actually even more flexible than you see in Ethereum. What you do is inside the call, there just has to be specified inside the call to a dApp. There just has to be specified a payer, right? And the payer can be anything. It could be the dApp, and the dApp could also specify rules. They could say, if this transaction is within this value or more than this value, then we're happy to pay the gas. But if it's lower than this value, we won't pay the gas, right? Or if it's interacting with dApp in this way, we'll pay the gas. Say it's a governance vote. But if interacting in a different way, we won't pay the gas.
Interesting.
But you can also do things. You can say like, oh, this wallet is going to pay, this other wallet's going to pay for it. So let's say I'm on Radix and I've got 50 wallets, but only one of them has got Radix tokens in it, because I've separated them out into like my like crazy degen tokens, into my savings account, into a bunch of other stuff. I can delegate my first wallet to pay the fees for all of the other accounts. So I don't have to move tokens between I don't have to have a Radix in every single account to be able to use the network as well. And you can also specify companies to do that. So say a wallet goes, we'll just sponsor fees on behalf of our customers up to a certain level every month. That can also happen as well. So all of that programmability is entirely within the transaction layer.
Very interesting. And you guys have a lot of good things with the standardization, with the smart accounts, with Radix engine, and I'm very bullish on that from a tech perspective. But always we have a problem, and that's that with new chains, there's not a lot of money on new chains. By definition, it's a new chain, it's a new ecosystem. All of the billions and the tens of billions is on ETH mainly, and ETH rollups. So how are you guys planning to bring over the capital from ETH into Radix? Speaking about bridges, speaking about the cross-chain liquidity, on-ramps, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of bid bridges that are looking at Radix, and I'll talk about two, but there are sort of more in the pipeline as well. The first is Instabridge, and Instabridge is going to be going live very shortly after Babylon goes live, and that's going to bring wrapped Ethereum, wrapped USDC, wrapped USDT, and wrapped Bitcoin. Or wrapped Bitcoin, because it's Bitcoin from Ethereum rather than Bitcoin from Bitcoin, to the network. That will be that bridge will be available within 2 weeks, but it won't be a permissionless bridge. It will be a KYC AML bridge. And then we are working very closely with Layer 0 to bring sort of like a full trustless networking messaging layer to Radix, which will allow things like Stargate and those kind of things to come to the network as well. That's the kind of bridging I'm really excited about long term, because I think that it's the ability for networks to talk to networks and dApps on different networks to talk to different dApps on different networks that I think becomes really interesting. I think that at the moment our bridging paradigm is quite simple. We go, oh, I've got Ethereum on this network. I want to bring it across to that network. I actually think that's going to be less used. And I think what's more going to be used is like, I have assets in Aave. I want to be able to borrow against those assets in Aave against this application inside Radix, where you're not actually passing across the assets in Aave, they stay in Aave, but you're essentially passing across what you might see as a right to draw and an IOU or something like that to another network. And it's when you start to see the composability of like applications to applications on top of public ledgers that I think that starts to become very useful. But there will be simple asset bridging at the start. And then we'll bring more comprehensive asset bridging later with layer 0, and then post that we'll start to help people integrate the networks more closely so that applications can be integrated as well. Because for my vision on this, and the thing that we really focus on in Radix, is the user experience of Web3 and DeFi. Now, I that means that we really focus on onboarding new users. We really focus on how easy it is to get up and running as a non-custodial direct user of a public ledger. And we really focus on the ease of use of the applications that you interact with. However, we recognize that a lot of the liquidity, a lot of the assets, a lot of the sort of big money is in other ecosystems. But that doesn't stop people from being able to use Radix as the main interface, the main place that they want to use all of their applications. And as long as you've got this sort of like trustless messaging protocols that can move between layers, then there's no reason that you can have all of the users on Radix, and then then sort of you have your more institutional, sophisticated or long-term sort of holders that have been holding in Aave and Compound and things that they're very happy with, that can then use that, be able to bridge that liquidity and assets and usage to the Radix network and to the user bases there, without actually having to do the simple concept of bridging, instead being able to do things like rehypothecate, like reuse collateral that exists in other ecosystems And that's sort of my long-term vision here. But sorry, I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but yeah.
And how scalable is Babylon? Because I know that you have another update coming probably next year. So let's speak a bit about that, because let's say that, I'm just thinking out loud, but let's say that you guys launch and it's super nice, everything is fantastic, wallet is super nice. What if someone builds a game with a ton of microtransactions? You can easily have one dev generating thousands, tens of thousands of transactions if it's cheap. And if it's possible to do, it's not necessarily that you need many devs to fill up the blockchain. You can have one dev that just spams the whole thing if there is some interesting use case. So how do you guys think about that? What is the scalability of Babylon? And most importantly, what will the future updates to the Radix network allow?
Yeah, no, really good questions. So I'll start off with the sort of the headline, which is that the transactional throughput of Babylon, the TPS of Babylon at the start will be 50 transactions per second, which doesn't sound very much. I will talk but there are a few things that are important in this. The first is that this continues to be part of our long-term roadmap. If you look at our history, we've spent the last 7 years doing research into scalability of consensus algorithms, and Cerberus, our consensus algorithm, when it gets to a fully sharded state, which is when you're talking about in Xi'an, has already been benchmarked to be able to do sort of millions of transactions per second. And unlike other networks, what we did is we actually started off with that end state architecture in mind. So everything that we've built in Radix today, in terms of how the Radix engine works, in terms of how the Scrypto state model works, in terms of how consensus works, is ready for sharding. Everything's been built around that concept in the first place. The other thing I'd say is that we will continue to optimize the network towards Babylon, towards Xi'an as well. So 50 transactions per second is what we're starting at, but we see a number of ways in which we can optimize between then and when Xi'an goes live. And the starting point for us has always been the most conservative. Like everything is as safe as possible rather than as fast as possible to start off with. And the reason that we feel like we can do that is because it's an entirely new network. So when a new network goes live, it's very uncommon for things to sort of push above the sort of 1 or 2 transactions per second. I mean, even if you look at something like Avalanche today or Cosmos today or something like that, they're actually not doing that many transactions per second on average. They do spike sometimes, but the overall usage isn't actually that high. And so we have this roadmap of improving the network of Babylon up to Xi'an, and then post Xi'an we have this sort of like ability to completely open up and get a huge amount of throughput. I will say one more thing though. The main thing that people talk about when they talk about public ledgers is transactions per second. The thing is that transactions per second isn't the metric that we as an industry should be caring about. What is the most used thing on Ethereum? What takes up most of the gas usage on Ethereum? It's DEX swaps. Specifically, Uniswap is the majority, but it's DEX swaps. And if you care about DEX swaps per second, this becomes an entirely different thing, because we were talking about how we'd optimize the way that the Radix engine works from a point of execution. We've got rid of the EVM, so we're able to squeeze a bunch more performance out of it. And so what I've got is this idea of the DeFi efficiency index, right? And so if you look at something like Solana's headline throughput is 65,000 transactions per second. But the number of DEX swaps per second it can do is 273. So if you divide 273 by 65,000, you have a DeFi efficiency of less than 1%, right? On Radix, we get a DeFi efficiency of around 80%, which means that our network would only need to be able to do 350 transactions per second to be able to exceed the performance of Solana. So the amount that we're able to squeeze out of a throughput of a single transaction throughput is actually massively higher, because we've optimized our execution environment specifically for this. So these are all the things I'd say, but it's still an ongoing process of upgrading towards this long-term roadmap of Xi'an and beyond.
I'm uploading a music here because I want to demonstrate something. Let's see. Anyway, the file is too large. I was gonna play some RuneScape music. I don't know if you know RuneScape, but you probably know it. But my dream, what I wanted to demonstrate with that song is that, my dream is to have RuneScape on chain, where you have trading, killing a monster and all of that, looting, doing boss fights. And I think that the reason a lot of chains don't have a lot of transactions per second, especially new ones, like you mentioned, is because they don't have account abstraction. So it's a lot of hurdle for the user to even get started. But if Radix comes out with account abstraction or smart accounts by default, so you can sponsor their transactions, then I think you guys are going to have a lot of apps consuming a lot of block space very quickly, because a lot of bandwidth very quickly. Because if it's easy to onboard users and I can pay $10 for them to get started and get onboarded, and they can easily start doing transactions and it's cheap, I think people are gonna use it and maybe even spam it a bit, because when resources are plentiful, we as devs, we start using them more. 30 years ago, when game developers were building games, they were optimizing each and every kilobyte because you just had like 10 kilobyte storage. Now you open up a Chrome tab, it's like 5 gigabyte to open a Chrome tab. So the more resources we have, the more we're gonna use. So that's why if you have a very nice onboarding and you have very nice experience for users and devs, and you can sponsor transactions, I think you're gonna have a lot of demand for that nice user experience and block space, and which will mean that we will have to get that next update probably next year in order to accommodate all of that demand. So for me, the most exciting thing is that we have milestone number 1, which is Babylon, but even more exciting is what's gonna happen after Babylon, because Babylon is just the beginning. The fact that you can have this Radix engine and people can finally start building in the ways that Radix was intended to be used. But the big impact probably is going to happen when we have scaling, where it is possible to have something like RuneScape on chain, instant onboarding, horizontal scaling. You don't even notice that there is millions of users using, because it's so cheap, and it's just like internet. You just add more servers and it scales automatically horizontally. So that's what I hope we can achieve within this cycle. What is your current view? If you look at the coming year, 2 years, how far do you think you will be able to come, let's say, until 2025 in terms of tech? Obviously, it's impossible to say. Tech is always it's impossible to predict at the time. But like, what's your vision for the coming years? Now that we have Babylon in the coming days, what's like the next big vision that you guys have?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, we're tool makers, right? That's what I see us as. We are the infrastructure that allows other people to be successful on top of us. That's ultimately what a public ledger is for. It's a common good that allows people to invent new ways of doing things. Now we have a bunch of ideas based on what we think we understand from our customer base already, from what people have been building and like giving us feedback on Scrypto, on the Radix engine, on the wallet, and all of this kind of stuff. And we have like some very strong opinions about what the nature of these public ledgers should be in terms of being credibly neutral, in terms of them being able to provide privacy, as well as being able to provide sort of the functionality that you expect on top of the public ledgers. And we have a roadmap for our user experience as well. So the Radix wallet comes out on Babylon, but we're going to continue to update that and add functionality to that over the next year, 2 years. And we've got a bunch of stuff coming on that. So like when we go live, multi-factor recovery and authentication won't be live in the wallet, but it's going to be coming soon after. Making sure that deep linking works so that you can easily use your DeFi completely mobily and it feels completely intuitive, as good as a desktop experience, but on the mobile phone. Making sure that you can sort of use it for things that you wouldn't currently think of using your mobile wallet for, in terms of ticketing and loyalty and all this kind of stuff, and gaming. Those are all like incremental improvements that we're making to the network and to the Radix wallet. But what you're asking is, how is the Radix tech from a adoption point of view or from an innovation point of view going to look by 2025? I think much of what we've built now is the foundations. Like we know we've got a very good starting abstraction point. But now what's going to be really important is going to be following the market, is going to be working really closely with our customers and with our users and with the developers and the builders, because the vision that we have is so large, but it only comes about when you have an incredible community that is actually inspired by that vision and building against that vision. So I'm not ducking the question here so much as saying, I think it's important that Web3 companies become more and more user focused and more and more user centric. I think there's a lot of emphasis in the industry on tech roadmaps. And while we do have a very impressive technology roadmap, what is going to shape us much more is going to be things like RuneScape turns out, Ivanscape turns out to be the biggest app that has ever been built in Web3, and it's built on top of Radix. And that's got that's got a certain things that need to be optimized, improved, or added to the tool set to make sure that Ivan can continue to be successful building in our ecosystem, right? So like those are the things that are going to be the big inputs for us, and I think should be the big inputs of any company that's trying to scale, really. I think that the industry takes too much time not caring about the user, and I think that we want to change that.
Fantastic, Piers. Listen, I think we covered most of the important pieces. Have we missed something that our audience should know before we wrap this up, whether it's about Babylon or about future roadmap, something else? And most importantly, where can people go in order to learn more, get involved, and be part of the Radix community?
Yeah, the main thing I'd say is anyone who's already holding Radix tokens, anyone who's already staking on the network, when Babylon happens, the transition is very easy. All you have to do is download the new Radix wallet on your mobile phone, and then there's a really easy transition tool to be able to do it from your existing desktop wallet to the new mobile wallet. The Android and iOS apps have already been approved. Go on.
But Piers, so that's going to be with a hardware wallet, right? So you can connect your Trezor or Ledger or whatever hardware wallet you have.
Ledger is the only wallet, yeah. Ledger.
Okay. So you use your Ledger now with a desktop wallet, and then you will be able to transition into mobile wallet in an easy way.
Correct, that's right. So it actually connects via so the way the Ledger wallet works is to keep it desktop compatible. We have a little Chrome extension or a little web extension that allows you then to connect your Ledger to your computer, and then your computer establishes a connection with your phone, and you're able to do all the authentications via your Ledger. So every Ledger will work. But you will need a desktop to use it to start off with, and then we're going to build in direct Ledger compatibility for the newer devices later on. But that will work smoothly from day one. And the main thing I want everyone to do is go to radixdlt.com after the 27th of September. So at the end of this week, go and download the Radix wallet and go and play around with the apps that are launching on top of the Radix network, because there's a lot of fun stuff. And I promise you, it's going to feel completely different from any wallet you've used before in your life.
You know, one other thing I look forward to, and that's that Radix can be traded on a DEX in a nice way with massive liquidity, like all other L1 coins. Because
Yeah.
you look at any L1 coin, the main source of trading and liquidity is normally their DEXs, and I love that we don't have to depend on centralized exchanges anymore. So,
Right.
final question to you, Piers: how do you think this will evolve? For example, do you know if there are market makers that are gonna come to DEXs? Like, well, what is your view or your read on the current and up and coming DEX ecosystem for Radix and Radix token?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of dexes that are launching on top of Radix that I would definitely recommend people take a deeper dive on. There's sort of Caviar 9, Aussie Swap, Alpha Dex, Astralescent, and a bunch of others. If you go to radixecosystem.com, you can find all of the dexes there. And then market makers, we work with a bunch of market makers. I know that the dexes are also talking with market makers. We've got a lot of people who've already started the process of integrating so that they can deploy capital on top of Radix. So really excited to see that come alive very quickly. The last thing I'll say on that as well is everything on Radix is every token that you stake is a liquid stake token. So there's liquid stake units, LSUs, is a native feature of the Radix network brought to you by the Radix engine, which means that you don't have to rely on something like Lido or Rocket Pool or something like that to exist on Radix. Everything that you stake becomes a liquid stake token. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting sort of like trading and products that come out of that as well.
Fantastic, Piers. Guys, check the link below for all the information. Join the community, be part of Radix, because now is really the time, because now Radix is really starting. Everything before was warm-up. Now we finally have a working ecosystem with the programming language in place, with Radix engine in place. So that's coming within the few days with Babylon, and that's the starting point. And it's only so you're still early. You're definitely early if you join now. Piers, thanks a lot for this time. We're gonna be in touch, and goodbye. Goodbye,
Thank you very
everyone.
much, Ivan.